He remembers everything. He always hasn't smoked as much pot as I have. I remember I wanted it because I love the idea the gallery got together because, like I said, there were only a few galleries that wouldn't give us shows. I had one once in the street. I got my old boyfriend Bill to a folding frame, and I went up one Sunday and leaned it against a wall across the street from the Whitney and hung 20 pictures that I put in little box frames. I sold 5 of them, and I had such a good time. I always went, oh geez, so they were 11, 14, I think I sold them for 35. And somebody remembered and called me for Christmas if they wanted to buy one. That was pretty good. And then I never did it again, but that's how, and then I said, you know, we started talking. I said, I envisioned, I didn't remember like having, you know, 1 or 2 people have the show. The people had their own wall to hang whatever they wanted up on. And that I really liked the idea. Also, I liked the beginning because I'm all for anarchy, and once it started getting organized and somebody was going to be the boss or this and that was it for me. Because I really like not knowing what I'm doing. I like serendipity. You know, I don't like, you know, untalented, bad work, but apart from that, you know, I like, you know, tasty but free. And I remember that's how that was. And it was totally nuts, and that's for me. And it was fun. And I remember, Alan, you reviewed it. And you gave me my very first review in the Times when Old News, Resurrection City. So I've loved you. I'm a faithful lover. A man with taste. But it was a beautiful space, and it was fun. So it started getting too organized for me. But that's why it's here 40 years later. And I got to say, this is the greatest bathroom I've ever been in, including the closet.
It certainly is.
What a bathroom!
Well, Sonia might argue with you about my taste because apparently I panned a show of hers.
Oh.
She said, or at least was not particularly favorable.
But at least you reviewed it. That's what counts. There's no such thing as a bad review.
That's right. Count the column inches, as we used to say. Sonia, well, how did you get involved?
You know, I had been a mentee of W.G. Smith in '71. And because of my experience with him, I got even more interested in photography. I knew no other people my age who took pictures. There, as it turns out, were other photographers. I just didn't know you all. And I was invited to join his studio when he was creating Let Truth Be the Prejudice, that the show to end all shows.
That was at the Jewish one.
At the Jewish, yeah. And so that's why I thought I could create a photo exhibit of my own, which is what Lee came to see, and da-da. And then I covered George Wallace during his campaign, and then George Wallace got shot, and I was there for 5 days, and a minute before he was shot, one of the Secret Service came and said, we're going to have to take your credentials, and I was like, okay, I'll deal with that after this event, and the next thing we heard was da-da-da-da-da, and he was shot, and I got my first picture, full page in Life.
Wow.
And that was the exhibit you can't put. But I love you anyway.
Why is it they shoot these guys, they don't die? They shot Reagan, they wounded him. Shoot Wallace, you know. Why keep the left aim?
Yeah, the left needs more gun practice.
That's right. Really gets me mad. I mean, this Reagan, Nixon was unscathed. I mean, what the hell? All the Bushes.
Moving right along. Not inciting, Soho Photo does not endorse violence against any political parties at all.
Unless they're on the right.
But those were heady days. And yeah, there were great photographers before us, but we didn't know them. They were up in the Time Life building, up on the 28th floor, you know. And when I did that picture of the assassination, co-rentmeester, the great co-rentmeester from town, was sent to meet me at the hospital where Wallace was, and he was told to take my film, put it in his sock, and get the heck out of there. And a few minutes or an hour later, the FBI or the CIA or whoever, some Secret Service came up to me and said, "Ma'am, we're going to have to ask you for your film." And I looked at them and I said, "What film?" Because Cole had already gotten on the train to New York. And anyway, my first engagement with a photo editor was up there at the time. I always joke, it's not funny, I started at the top and I've been working my way down.
I've said that myself.
Yeah.
Not about you, but about me. So.
Likewise.
I know the feeling. Let me ask a question of the group here. Just raise your hands. How many of you went to photo school? No one here went to photo school. No one here studied photography in school. After. That's a second major difference in the environment that we're in, is that you can actually become a working photographer and have a career in photography without even a BFA. I realize for the younger people here that may be an incredible idea. And we'll tell you how old we all are.
Now, how many teach?
Yeah, but my eyes are going, but I assume there might be some in the back there. So, yeah, Harvey.
I saw the ad in the New York Times. It wasn't an ad, it was a little article. And I came down, and that's how I got involved. And I totally credit Lee for initiating everything. And from my point of view, Lee was the generator and the instigator of all of this. And it never would have happened without him. But what Soho Photo did for me was it sort of gave me permission to become a photographer. I didn't know any other photographers. I was actually in the business world. I was working in the corporate world, and I was photographing on my own. I probably took a class or two before, but I really didn't know any photographers. And coming to the first meeting at the gallery, at the space at this point, meant that, wow, there were 40 other people like me who were a little crazy, who were a little off, but who loved photography, and we were like renegades. We didn't know that there were other people like that. I'm from Pittsburgh, and it's a great city, and I say if I lived there and was working there, I wouldn't have become a photographer because there's no support system. We started a support system. And as crazy as that sounds now, because everyone's a photographer, you walk out of your house, you have a camera with you, right? Cell phone. There was none of that. And what Soho Photo, and I really am thankful to Lee and to the organization, and it's amazing that it's here for 40 years, is that it gave us permission to be what we really wanted to become. And we all became and still do photography, and that's, to me, a great gift. So I have to thank you, and,
No, but you know,
that we're still here.
I appreciate that, but it was also Jill and
Right.
Catherine,
Yeah,
all
but-
those that
yeah,
met.
but-
It was all a group passion, and
It
we
was.
all saw
We all helped each other.
Absolutely.
That was the other thing.
We love
To
looking at
me,
pictures.
it was a community. We helped each other. I think you still help each other now. That's why you're here. In my teaching, I tell people to join an organization, whether it's Enfoco or Soho Photo or PWP. We don't have enough organizations like that in America, and especially in a big city like New York. We don't have a publication that just
Well,
does
we got the internet,
photography.
there's all those,
Yeah, now
forums
that
on the internet.
yeah, but that's sort of anonymous.
It is
You
what
know, I
it
don't
is.
know those people. We became friends, right?
Yeah.
I had a crush on Jill. I mean, Jill and I went to high school together. She was way,
I think we all had pushes.
she was way older than I was.
Now you tell me.
She was the and the beatnik, beatnik of the time. She wore black. No other kids wore black in high school.
She lived upstairs in the Fantastic.
Yeah, I remember.
It was probably also a 2500-foot loft.
No.
Floor through, 16-foot ceilings. But we you see, but he was a baby. He was a half a year behind me. When I was in 9A, he was 9B. Some
You
infantile.
would never even look at us.
Well, no.
Amy, I remember you coming to the first year, I think you were invited to give a talk, and there was a conversation that year about whether photography would ever be a collective, would ever be collective. Remember that? And it was inconceivable, the prices that auction houses were getting. It's inconceivable now with the prices that auction houses are getting for vintage classic photographs. But that was a discussion in the 70s, whether photography was really an art form. They had these kind of silly conversations about, you know, whether it was considered an art form. And I may be wrong, but I remember your position was because it was reproducible, you know, any number, that it would never achieve probably the kinds of prices that art, that paintings.
I don't think I would have been in my position because it's not what I was finding in the Voice.
Yeah.
You know,
But you remember those conversations in the 70s?
I remember the conversations,
Yeah.
and that argument was there. That was the problem that collectors had, and I may have been simply reporting on the problem that early collectors were having with coming to photography from the graphic arts or from painting. And, you know, I mean, just in a sense, sort of repeating the kinds of things I was hearing from Lee Whitkin at the time, or from the people at Light Gallery, who were telling me about conversations they were having with this was not only the era of the emerging photographers, the era of emerging photography emerging as a medium, and of emerging collecting of photography. And so, you know, I would go up to Lee Whitkin's gallery and, you know, talk with him for an afternoon, and he would say, well, I had more people coming in telling me that they really love the pictures, but you know, photography can be, you know, reproduced, and there might be, you know, 400 copies of this David Octavius Hill out there, and why should they pay me $50 for this one? And so I'm more guessing that I was recounting the market, you know, the beginnings of the market, because I always believed that it was going to be a collectible medium. And I was convinced that eventually the market would stabilize, eventually people would recognize the value of the great works, and eventually they'd even come to support, as they have, living working artists, not just dead ones, you know, or not just collect the work of you know, artists who had passed on, but that they would actually be identifying important living artists who might actually be able to live off their work, and there are some who do that today, more than a few.
Don't you think that when whoever figured out that we have limited editions, that's what sealed the deal for collectability of photographs? Because back then, we knew you could just churn them out.
Yeah, although nobody, very few people did. I mean, I never met a photographer, a darkroom photographer who said, I just love to go in and make 40 prints out of one of my negatives and then go in and a week later make another 40. I never met a single photographer who ever felt that way, even the ones who loved the darkroom as a meditation chamber, you know. So we have no example that I know of a photographer who glutted the market before the limited edition idea, who glutted the market with his or her prints.
There was no market.
Well, but even after there was a market, in fact, I think you could argue that the limited edition is more of a glutting of the market than the original method of printmaking that photographers had. Because what started was that the gallery owners said, this was their argument, the way we will convince collectors to buy your work is if you start limiting your editions. Well, if you're going to create a limited edition, you're not generally going to create it one print at a time. You're going to buy all the paper, you're going to buy the matte paper, you're going to buy the dry mount stuff, people were still dry mounting their prints back then, right? You're going to buy the portfolio box if you're doing a portfolio, and you're going to make 20 sets. And you're going to print 20 identical copies of 10 different images, which means you're going to put out 200 prints of your images at once.